Okay, so today we're diving deep into some Pema Chodron, right? You, the learner, sent over some excerpts from Comfortable with Uncertainty and also Taking the Leap. And as always, we're going to break it down for you, give you the meat, no fat,
Yeah.
really help you get a handle on what she's saying without getting lost in all the super academic stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So basically the goal here with this whole deep dive thing is to kind of explore this idea that engaging in certain practices and having the right mindset can really help you navigate all the crazy ups and downs that life throws at you.
Sure.
Especially those, uncertain times, the hard times, right? Think about it. Whether you're, I don't know, about to give a big presentation or trying to learn something totally new or just curious about something, having these tools, these practices can totally change how you deal with the unknown, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of feeling completely overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we even begin with this? What pops out at you when you look at these excerpts?
Well, one thing that's really cool is that both of these books, even though they're kind of about different things, they both kind of land on this same idea.
Right.
That being able to handle all the uncertainty in life. It's not about, finding some kind of magical stable place out there.
Right.
Because that doesn't exist. It's really about building up something inside you, this kind of resilience and learning how to deal with your own mind and your own experiences so that when those shaky moments happen,
Yeah.
you can move through them, more easily.
Yeah, I totally get that. And one thing that really stood out to me was this whole idea of there being this fundamental goodness inside each of us.
Oh, yeah.
One of the books calls it a noble or awakened heart or something like that. And it uses this awesome analogy as it's like butter and milk. It's already there, this capacity for love and compassion, even when we feel totally the opposite, What's the big takeaway there, you think?
Well, the main thing is that this ability to be kind, it's not something that we got to go out and get. We already have it. It's built in.
Okay.
And even when we're being jerks, or even when we're surrounded by a bunch of negativity, that real genuine heart, it's still there. And get this, the book says that it's actually in those tough times, when we're really struggling, that's when we can find this deep source of healing.
Wow.
This tenderness that we might not even realize is there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of cool because it changes how we think about our problems.
Yeah.
Right? They're not just roadblocks. They're like doorways to something deeper inside us.
That is so interesting because it really changes the focus, right?
Yeah.
From trying to avoid those feelings to actually leaning into them in a different way, you know? And that kind of takes us to this whole idea of being, comfortable with uncertainty.
Yeah.
Which isn't just some state of mind. It's something you got to practice. And the text mentions this path of a warrior something. I don't know if I can even pronounce it.
Yeah, the warrior bodhisattva.
Yeah, that one. What's that all about?
So basically, you can think of a warrior bodhisattva as someone who, when they face tough stuff in life, they don't try to run away from it or find some perfect solution.
Okay.
They kind of step right into the middle of the mess.
Huh.
And they're committed to being okay themselves, but also helping others be okay too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about moving towards all the difficult and confusing stuff in life.
Yeah.
Instead of just trying to avoid it.
Okay, so it's not avoiding the problem, it's going through the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And all those practices that support this idea, exercises where you focus your attention. There's one called Pongolin. It helps you deal with tough emotions.
Right.
And using certain phrases to change your perspective and really nurturing qualities like kindness and balance.
Yeah.
Those are all about uncovering that tenderness we talked about.
Yeah.
Even when we're feeling really crappy.
Okay, so this isn't about reaching some permanent state of bliss or transcendence or something.
Nope, not at all. It's not about finding some perfect happy ending. It's more about growing up.
Yeah.
Becoming more ourselves.
Yeah.
And tougher in the face of all the unpredictable stuff in life.
Right.
So it's more it's about having what you need to deal with the real world, not some fantasy world where there are no problems.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Now, there's this one practice that seems super important to this whole approach.
Oh, yeah.
And it's called Maitri. And it's often translated as loving kindness, I guess. But the focus is on directing that kindness towards ourselves first.
Right.
And I thought that analogy in the book about the mother bird and her chicks, that was super powerful. This fierce love that she has for all her chicks.
Yeah.
Even the ones that maybe don't look so great. So how does that apply to like how we see ourselves?
Well, the main point with this whole self-compassion thing is that it's about accepting all of ourselves.
Ugh.
The good and the bad, the parts we like and the parts we don't.
Yeah.
And it's not about putting ourselves down all the time
Right.
or trying to be perfect, because that's impossible.
Yeah.
It's more about being honest with ourselves, loving ourselves, and really wanting what's best for ourselves. Just like that mother bird takes care of all her babies.
That makes a lot of sense. And the books also say that these practices, like meditation, they're not about trying to turn ourselves into some better version of ourselves. They're about like making friends with who we already are.
Yeah, exactly.
Which to me feels like it takes so much pressure off.
Absolutely.
It's not about like fixing ourselves. It's about like getting to know ourselves with kindness.
Mm-hmm.
So how does befriending ourselves, how does that play out like in real life?
Well, it's about being curious about whatever's going on inside us right now,
Yeah.
whatever we're feeling.
Yeah.
It's not about judging ourselves or trying to change anything.
Okay.
It's more about like really getting to know ourselves. And when we do this, when we do things like meditation, it helps us become more steady, more grounded.
Yeah.
We start to understand our thoughts and emotions better, and we don't get so swept away by them.
Right.
We start to appreciate just being in the moment,
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. Now, speaking of meditation, it seems like that's like the foundation of this whole approach.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like the bedrock. Why is that, do you think?
Well, meditation, or what's often called focused attention practice, it's like a direct route to getting to know your own mind.
Oh.
It's a place where you can like observe your thoughts and your emotions without all the judgment,
Yeah.
You can cultivate that unconditional friendliness towards yourself that we were talking about. And it lets you see the patterns in your mind more clearly.
Okay, so it's like creating a space where you can actually see what's going on in your head.
Exactly. It's like, if you have a still pond, you can see the reflections perfectly, right?
Right.
It's kind of like that.
I like that analogy. And the texts mention that, like, when you do this consistently,
Mm-hmm.
you might start to experience these little gaps in your inner monologue.
Oh, yeah.
Like moments where you're just present and there's no mental chatter.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds pretty incredible, honestly.
Those moments are like little gold nuggets,
Yeah.
They show you that there's this whole other part of you that's more open, more spacious.
Okay.
It's not caught up in all the stories and the drama. It's like waking up from a dream for a second and just being there. And that, the books say, that's a big part of training in what they call unconditional awareness, which is basically relaxing into who you really are.
Huh.
And it can all start with something as simple as, paying attention to your posture when you sit down to meditate.
It's so cool how these, like, ancient practices have these really practical starting points.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, one thing that really stopped me in my tracks
Oh, yeah.
was this idea that the reality we see isn't actually as solid as we think it is. Like, our opinions and emotions are what create this seemingly solid world.
Right.
Can you unpack that a bit?
So basically what they're saying is that how we experience reality, it's shaped a lot by our thoughts, emotions, and beliefs.
Okay.
We tend to hold on to our own interpretations of things
Yeah.
as if they're the absolute truth.
Right.
But the books are suggesting that, those interpretations, they're more like, temporary constructions, exactly. And when they say, everything's like a dream, they don't mean that our experiences aren't real.
Right.
They're just saying that things are more fluid, more impermanent than we realize.
Yeah.
And if we cling too tightly to our stories, to our fixed way of seeing things, it can actually hold us back from being wise and responding to life's changes in a creative way.
Wow. So in our practice, especially in meditation, the goal isn't to get rid of thoughts, but to, like, change our relationship to them.
Exactly. It's about seeing thoughts as like events in the mind,
Right.
like pictures flashing on a screen,
Yeah.
instead of these solid, true realities.
Okay.
And when we think, that becomes a chance to be gentle with ourselves, to be non-judgmental.
Yeah.
So when a thought pops up, instead of getting all caught up in it, we can just notice it and then gently bring our attention back to the present moment. And that helps us loosen the grip of those habitual thought patterns,
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. And that connects to the idea that, when we resist the way things are, that often leads to suffering.
Oh, for sure.
Like when we fight against change or try to hold on to what's comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
we just create conflict inside.
Yeah.
So how does this all relate to our practice, you think?
Well, when we resist change, when we want things to be different than they are, that's a huge cause of suffering.
Okay.
And meditation, those focused attention practices, they help us become more aware of that resistance when it shows up.
Right.
So instead of reacting right away or trying to push away the stuff that feels bad,
Yeah.
we can learn to just sit with that energy of resistance.
Okay.
Just observe it without all the judgment.
Yeah.
And that allows us to, gradually loosen its hold on us and start to accept that, life is constantly ebbing and flowing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. The text also talks about this idea of refraining when we're feeling uncomfortable.
Oh, right, right.
What does that actually look like in practice, though?
So refraining is all about creating a pause.
Okay.
When we're feeling uncomfortable, whether it's like physical restlessness or we're emotionally uneasy or our mind is just going crazy, our natural instinct is to distract ourselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. To make the feeling go away, ASAP.
Yeah. Yeah.
But refraining is about choosing not to do that.
Okay.
Not right away, at least.
Mm.
It's about creating a little space,
Yeah.
a moment of stillness
Mm-hmm.
where we can just observe what's happening without going into panic mode.
Okay.
So, it might be like noticing that you want to fidget,
Right.
but not giving into it right away, just observing that urge with a sense of curiosity.
So it's like putting a little space between the thing that's making us uncomfortable and our reaction to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's about breaking those automatic patterns of running away
Yeah.
and building up our ability to just be with that discomfort, even if it's just for a little bit.
Right.
And that pause can be super helpful
Yeah.
because it lets us respond more thoughtfully instead of just reacting out of habit.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, another tool that the text mentions is working with these slogans.
Oh, yeah, the slogans.
What are those all about? What's the point of these short, often kind of paradoxical phrases?
So these warrior slogans, they're designed to shake up our usual way of thinking,
Okay.
the way our ego likes to see things.
Mm.
They're like these little mental reminders that can help us see things from a different angle and break free from those habitual ways of thinking and acting.
Okay.
So, for example, there's one that says, always meditate on whatever provokes resentment.
Huh.
And that's encouraging us to turn towards the difficult emotions instead of running away from them,
Interesting.
to actually use them as fuel for our practice and our understanding.
Wow. And there's one slogan that's highlighted, right?
Yeah.
That all activities should be done with one intention. What's the main idea behind that?
So the main idea is to infuse everything you do with mindfulness and intention.
Okay.
So whether you're doing something, seemingly ordinary like eating or walking or something big like working on a huge project, the idea is to be aware of your motivation.
Right.
Why are you doing this? And according to this slogan, the intention behind everything we do should line up with our deeper values.
Okay.
Things like waking up to the present moment, cultivating compassion, letting go of attachments, recognizing our interconnectedness with everything.
Yeah.
It's about bringing that practice into every aspect of our lives.
I love that. It's not just a separate thing you do. It's infused in everything.
Exactly.
Now, the texts also share this really powerful image of turning arrows into flowers, I think it was.
Oh, yeah.
Referencing the Buddha. What's the essence of that teaching, you think?
So that story is all about the possibility of turning our struggles and pain into opportunities for growth and understanding. The arrows, they represent the challenges, the difficult experiences, the negative emotions, all that stuff life throws at us.
Right, right.
And instead of letting them hurt us or defeat us,
Yeah.
the teaching is that through awareness and a change of perspective, we can actually learn to see them as something that can nourish us,
Okay.
like turning something harmful into something beautiful and helpful.
That's a beautiful image. And it also breaks down those obstacles into four maras, right?
Right, the four maras.
Can you just quickly explain what those represent?
Yeah, so you can think of the four maras as the main ways our ego tries to keep us stuck in these patterns of suffering.
Okay.
So the first one is the desire for pleasure,
Right.
which can lead to craving and dissatisfaction. The second one is this tendency to recreate ourselves,
Yeah.
to cling to a certain idea of who we are and try to avoid change.
Yeah.
The third one is the power of strong emotions to overwhelm us, to kind of take over. And the fourth one, which is often described as the fear of death,
Right.
is maybe more accurately understood as a fear of truly living, like a fear of embracing the uncertainty and vulnerability that comes with being alive.
Wow, that's deep.
And the text suggests that each of these maras,
Yeah.
they can actually become like a doorway to deeper wisdom if we approach them with curiosity and openness instead of resisting them.
That's really helpful. Now, there's this idea of the freedom of nothing solid.
Oh, yeah.
That sounds kind of paradoxical.
It does, doesn't it?
What does it mean, do you think?
Well, the paradox is that, we often look for security and stability in external things,
Yeah.
Possessions or relationships or even fixed ideas about ourselves and the world.
Right.
But the texts are saying that real freedom comes from recognizing that everything is impermanent and always changing.
Yeah.
So by leaning into our experience, even the uncomfortable stuff, without trying to hold on to it or push it away, we discover this deeper sense of space and liberation.
So it's like the more we try to control and solidify everything, the more trapped we feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when we let go of that need for solidity, when we
Yeah.
embrace the nothing solid,
Yeah.
that's when we open up to more possibility and ease.
Wow. That's powerful. And this leads to the advice to stay in the middle, not indulging or repressing whatever comes up. How does that play out in everyday life?
So staying in the middle path is all about finding a balanced way of relating to our experiences. So when a thought or emotion pops up,
Yeah.
instead of getting swept away by it, that's
Mhm.
indulging,
Right.
or trying to squash it, that's repressing.
Yeah, yeah.
The practice is to acknowledge it without judgment,
Okay.
to let it be there without clinging to it, and then gently shift our attention back to the present moment.
Okay.
And this applies to everything, hope and fear, pleasure and pain, the whole range of human experience.
Yeah.
By not getting stuck in those extremes,
Right.
we can find a more grounded and balanced way of navigating the ups and downs.
Yeah, yeah. Now the texts also talk about encountering the edge. What happens when we reach that point where we feel like we just can't take it anymore?
Well, encountering the edge, that's a big moment in our practice.
Yep.
It's where all our usual ways of avoiding stuff or clinging to stuff,
Right.
they're really put to the test. And if at that point
Yeah.
we can resist the urge to shut down completely or desperately grasp for a solution,
Yeah.
something really interesting can happen.
Okay.
This rigidity or hardness inside us can start to dissolve, and it opens us up to a deeper level of vulnerability and our natural goodness.
Wow.
And it's not framed as a punishment for hitting our limit.
Right.
It's presented as a potential doorway to more sanity and a more compassionate way of being.
That's a really cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
Now, the books talk about these 8 worldly dharmas.
Yeah.
These pairs like pleasure, pain, praise, blame, and so on. Well, what's the main takeaway there?
Well, the core understanding is that, we naturally cling to the good stuff, pleasure, praise, fame, gain.
Right.
And we try to avoid the bad stuff,
Mhm.
pain, blame, disgrace, loss.
Yeah, of course.
And that clinging and avoiding, that's actually a major source of our suffering.
Okay.
And the advice isn't to get rid of those feelings altogether because they're just part of life,
Right.
but to become really familiar with how they work in us, how they hook us,
Yeah.
and how they influence how we see things.
Okay.
And by understanding those patterns, we can start to loosen their grip on us
Right.
and find a more balanced and even-keeled way to deal with all the ups and downs that life throws at us.
That makes a lot of sense. And to help us stay grounded in the present moment, the texts talk about these 4 reminders.
Right, the 4 reminders.
So what are those and why are they so important?
So the 4 reminders are these reflections that help us to appreciate how precious and fragile our lives are,
Okay.
and to encourage us to really engage with our lives and our practice.
Yeah.
So they are the preciousness of our human birth, which is this amazing opportunity for growth and understanding.
Okay.
The reality of impermanence, which reminds us that nothing stays the same.
Right.
So we got to make the most of the present moment.
Yeah.
The principle of cause and effect,
Mhm.
which highlights the impact of our actions.
Yeah.
And the kind of the pervasiveness of suffering, which acknowledges that there are inherent challenges in life,
Yeah.
and that inspires us to seek liberation, both for ourselves and for others.
Okay.
And these reminders, they're not meant to be depressing or anything.
Right.
They're more about giving us a sense of urgency and purpose.
Yeah, I can see that. They definitely shift your perspective. And then there's that classic story about the Zen master and the samurai, right?
Oh, yeah, I love that story.
That one about heaven and hell being states of mind. How does that tie into what we're talking about, you think?
I think that story really captures the idea that how we experience reality is largely shaped by what's going on inside us,
Right.
Our reactions, our interpretations.
Yeah.
Heaven and hell, they're not actual places we go to.
Right.
They're more like these mental landscapes that we create with our thoughts and emotions in each moment. And when we cultivate equanimity, that balanced and open awareness,
Yeah.
it allows us to see that every situation, even the tough ones, has something to teach us.
Okay.
It's about taking responsibility for our inner world
Right.
and recognizing that it has a huge impact on how we experience life.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. So it's like constantly reminding ourselves that our inner state is key.
Absolutely.
And the books then talk about those 3 futile strategies that we often use when we're dealing with like difficult habits.
Oh, yeah.
What are those? And what's a better way to approach those habits, do you think?
So the 3 common ways we try to deal with those bad habits that don't really work are attacking ourselves.
Right.
Like being super critical and judgmental.
Yeah.
Indulging in the habit to try and soothe ourselves.
Yeah.
Or just ignoring it and hoping it goes away.
Yeah. I've definitely tried all 3 of those.
Yeah, me too. But none of them really address the root of the problem.
Right. Right.
And the book suggests that mindfulness is a much more effective approach.
Okay.
So that means acknowledging the habit, being honest with ourselves, but doing it gently before it takes over completely.
Okay.
And that gives us a chance to interrupt that automatic pattern,
Yeah.
to create some space for a different response.
So it's like catching ourselves earlier before we get totally swept away.
Yeah, and doing it with self-compassion instead of judgment.
Right, right. And texts talk about being completely open to whatever happens as like the opposite of our usual chaotic state.
Right.
What they call samsara.
Samsara.
Can you say more about that idea of openness?
So you can think of samsara not just as chaos,
Okay.
but also as this state of being where we're driven by our attachments, our aversions, and our ignorance.
Yeah.
And it just leads to this cycle of suffering.
Right.
And the opposite of that is being radically open to all of our experience.
All right.
The good, the bad, the whole shebang.
Yep.
And not resisting it or trying to control it.
Huh.
So it's about embracing all of life,
Mm-hmm.
the pleasant and the unpleasant, and being willing to just be present and engaged with it.
And this isn't about like being passive or indifferent.
No, not at all. It's about meeting each moment with a fresh, receptive attitude.
Right, right. And when we feel that anxiety, like when our sense of security is crumbling, the books offer a different way to look at it.
Oh, yeah.
How does that like shift our perspective?
So when that familiar feeling of comfort and stability starts to dissolve,
Yeah.
that's when anxiety often pops up.
Right.
And the texts suggest that this feeling, instead of being a purely bad thing, can actually be a sign that our comfort zone is being challenged. It can remind us that we're actually drawn to the vibrancy of life, the dynamism, even with all the uncertainty.
Yeah.
We don't want to just stagnate, right?
Right, right.
It's a subtle shift,
Yeah.
but it can help us see our discomfort not just as a threat,
Right.
but as a potential catalyst for growth and engagement with life.
Wow. I like that. So we're back to cultivating those 4 limitless qualities.
Oh, yeah.
Loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity.
Right.
And they're described as like essential aspirations, right?
Yeah, they are.
How do those qualities help us like deal with uncertainty and build up that resilience?
So these 4 qualities, they're like powerful antidotes to the patterns of fear, aversion, and self-centeredness, The stuff that often fuels our anxiety when we're faced with uncertainty. So by actively cultivating loving kindness, we develop a sense of warmth and care towards ourselves and others. Compassion allows us to connect with suffering, both our own and others, with empathy and a desire to alleviate it.
Okay.
Cultivating joy helps us appreciate the good stuff in our lives and the successes of others, which kind of counteracts negativity.
Right. Right.
And equanimity, that gives us a balanced and unbiased perspective so we can stay steady amidst all the ups and downs.
Yeah.
And these qualities, they work together to break down the barriers that separate us and to build this foundation of inner strength and connection.
That makes sense. And the texts give us like 3-step aspiration practices for each of those qualities, right?
They do, yeah.
What's the essence of those practices?
So the 3 steps for each quality involve first directing the aspiration towards ourselves.
Okay.
So like wishing ourselves to be filled with loving kindness, compassion, joy, or equanimity.
Right.
Then we extend that wish to the people we care about.
Okay.
And finally, we broaden the circle to include all beings.
Wow.
And this gradual expansion of our intention helps us cultivate